Welcome to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast, brought to you by the Sales Enablement Collective. Each episode, we sit down with sales enablement and revenue leaders from around the world and invite them to share their expertise and experience with the community. On this episode, we spoke to Brooke Coletti, Senior Enablement Manager at Amazon Web Services, on the keys to stakeholder buy-in and the steps she takes towards alignment ahead of her keynote at 2024's Sales Enablement Summit in San Francisco. I hope you enjoy our conversation. On the show today is Brooke Coletti again. Great to have you on the podcast once again, Brooke. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for having me.
And so for listeners who might not be familiar or didn't listen to the previous episode, could you just quickly introduce yourself and your enablement experience before we dive into today's episode? Just a quick refresh. We'll direct people in the description as well to the last episode that you were on, just so they can get the full run through.
Of course. My name is Brooke Coletti, and I'm currently the Partner Enablement Manager at Amazon Web Services. I've been in enablement for a little over 7 years, and I actually started in operations as an analyst, identified a couple gaps within that organization where I noticed managers were training inconsistently, put a proposal together, and was one of the first enablement hires at that company. And that's essentially what launched my career. So I've been in sales enablement for the majority of my career. Up until 2 years ago at AWS, I moved into the partner enablement role. So really building that toolbox.
I love that. And so for today's episode, we're sort of going to dive into stakeholder expectations, gaining buy-in. You'll be speaking about it at the Sales Enablement Summit in San Francisco next week as well, which is super exciting. But ahead of that and ahead of the presentation in San Francisco, I just want to ask, why do you feel like that's an important topic for you personally? What's your experience with gaining buy-in and alignment, and why is that such a topic that you love to speak about?
The reason I chose this topic is I feel like it's critical in order to get your enablement landed and actually adopted within an organization. And so many of us maybe have tried to roll out enablement without having all the necessary conversations and alignment, and we noticed that the enablement fell flat. And as a result, it's a waste of our time. It's the waste of the team's time. They take the enablement, but the behavior change is never implemented. So this is a really critical topic, I believe, for any enabler, because whether it's launching an asset or launching a full-blown methodology internally, getting that alignment is absolutely that first step that you need to do.
100%. And I think a lot of enablers know that buy-in and alignment is important, or at least they hear about it and they have an idea that's important, but actually sort of achieving it is still a big challenge. We see discussions in the community, we see LinkedIn posts, people struggling with this issue. Do you think that's an issue with how enablement approaches alignment, or is it that sometimes other teams need to maybe be a little bit more appreciative of what enablement is trying to do? Or is it a bit of both maybe?
I think that's an interesting take. I think it's a little bit of both. So let's start with the first piece. I think gaining alignment within any organization can be a challenge because depending on how complex your organization is, the more people you may have to gain alignment with. So at smaller companies, maybe it's just the head of each department. So you have operations, sales, marketing, etc. But maybe at larger organizations, you have international teams. So now you have to loop in 5 different sales leaders, one for each geography. Maybe you have to loop in people from marketing, but at different levels. Maybe you have someone that's in charge of the website, someone that's in charge of like your blogs, etc. So I think depending on your organization, gaining alignment can be a challenge because it is dependent on you understanding the complexities of how your organization functions and works. I think one of the first major steps is also not only understanding your organization, but who's in those roles and what are their goals for the year. I know we're going to talk about it later in the episode, but really understanding what drives your business is also going to help you get that alignment. So I'm excited to dive into that later this morning. The second piece is, do you think organizations should have more appreciation for enablement? And I think I want to be a little bit self-critical for us enablers and state that it's our role in enablement to demonstrate that value, to communicate that value. And so if someone within your organization, a key stakeholder you're working with, does not understand that value, it is up to us to explain why we think we should make this behavior change. What is that data that is supporting the decision that and our steps to wanting to make this change. And again, over time, that's going to get the rest of the stakeholders in the organization to appreciate us more through gaining that trust and that respect that when we make a recommendation, it's because it aligns with our goals. It's going to drive more of that business. So even though I like to say that I want everyone to instantly appreciate enablement, I do think we have to take that amongst ourselves to help with that process.
I like that perspective a lot. There's whatever sort of the blocker may be, there's always a little something that enablement can do to try and push that alignment. You actually called out a couple of sort of functions there, but I wanted to ask sort of what would be, say, a top three in terms of the stakeholders that you think you have to be aligned with that? Sometimes perfect alignment won't exist, but if you had sort of a top three that absolutely for a successful enablement initiative or enablement team that you need to get those people on board, what if you could sort of pick them out? I'm sure, like you said as well, some organizations are bigger and smaller and there's sort of differences there, but your sort of priority for alignment, where does that sort of lie?
I think as you hit on it, it's dependent on the organization, but also what initiative you're working on. So I would say definitely the sales leaders or the leader of the team that you're trying to drive this behavior change or this initiative with. You absolutely need their buy-in. Even better would be if you're going to a CRO, for example, and they do eventually buy in, going to their leadership team underneath them who are actually in the room with the reps coaching on that weekly, monthly basis to help reinforce the behavior would be an even added plus. Because sometimes, depending again on the culture of the organization, a CRO may say, yeah, this is great. But if us as enablement have not done the research to determine if this behavior would actually be able to be implemented based on our team's workflow, then there's going to be a clear miss and it's still not going to be adopted. So I know there's lots of nuances based on the organization, but I would definitely say whatever leader of the teams that you're trying to influence, that is priority number one. Priority number two is if your initiative has any tool related impact, making sure that we have operations, whether it's revenue ops, sales ops involved to ensure that the tools are also set up for success. So for example, if we're rolling out a methodology, we need to make sure that our Salesforce instance or whatever CRM we are using has the fields within the tool to actually implement into and track the information that we're trying to collect. It doesn't make sense for us in enablement to roll out training if there's actually no way for the team to implement it after the fact. So I would definitely say operations, because even if we get the sales leaders buy-in, maybe there's dependencies on operations roadmap that may delay this initiative too. So keeping that in mind. And then I would say the third is potentially marketing or potentially HR, again, depending on the initiative. Most of the initiatives, I would say, rely on marketing. For example, if we are trying to enable on a go-to-market messaging, discovery calls, objection handling, some of those topics, we want to make sure that we're amplifying and aligning to the best practices that marketing is already saturating the market with. So making sure that marketing has a seat at the table so that either one, it's a double check that we are using correct messaging, but also work with marketing to potentially build some of the assets for you. Again, it depends on whose roles and responsibilities, different things land within the organization. But marketing historically has been a key player with stakeholders I've used around helping build, whether it's collateral, updating websites, etc. And so those, I would say, are the three stakeholders, for the most part, in general, you're going to want to explore and make sure you buy in. Now, the way you approach those stakeholders may be different, however.
I like that a lot, and it's a really important point as well in terms of the approach. I'm thinking we spoke a little bit about sort of being self-critical as enablers, and it's always on enablement, and then sort of these different challenges. But could you share maybe a sort of story of major buy-in or alignment success or a win that you've had, and sort of how you achieved that? Because I think the perspective and the sort of almost how you did it could be really helpful to the listeners as well in terms of a positive success story that they can take away.
Absolutely. The first step I always do when trying to create a behavior change is understanding what our organizational goals are for the year. Because instantly, I'd like to assume that there is leadership buy-in across the organization, that we all, as a company, want to achieve those goals. So that's a great place to start. And so unpacking some of those goals and then determining what are some metrics that enablement can actually impact. So once you determine those metrics, it's really taking a step back and saying, okay, what behaviors drive that impact? So there was an example where we were really struggling with driving opportunities from the middle of the pipeline to close. Opportunities were really stalling. And so using the tools at my disposal, at the time we had Gong, we had Salesforce, we were using HighSpot at the time. And so really using the tools at my disposal to unpack those opportunities, pulling the pipeline, finding deals that had the longest delay, and then from there, starting to listen to calls, utilizing the tagging functionality within Gong to say, were there common themes around challenges that these customers were using? Is there a theme around verticalization? For example, is it a certain industry where we're noticing the stall? So identifying those trends and really diving deep into some of the metrics and the data at your disposal within the organization will help you pinpoint potentially, is this a industry related enablement initiative that you need to implement? Meaning maybe the challenges are more complex within the financial services space compared to, let's say, tech. Once you identify, again, this initiative I'm using as an example, we were really struggling demonstrating that value to financial services in particular. And so it was about refreshing our training around what features and functionalities do we have that are specific to that industry, and arming them with some of the extra security and regulations that that industry has. Because a lot of the concerns and objections that the team was facing was around security and compliance. And so arming the team on how to address those issues, making sure I work with marketing, as well as our legal team to ensure we have collateral that we can send to the prospects at that stage who are concerned about these things, documents that explains what our company does to relieve some of those security concerns. As well as partnering with the sales engineers within our organization who have that deeper understanding around some of those features and functionalities, making sure that team is aware, hey, the sales team is struggling with this, getting buy-in from the sales engineers leader that if a deal is stalled and we flag this deal, are the sales engineers willing to join the call and help navigate those conversations? So in that instance, as you can tell, it was identifying the problem. I talked to the sales leader, said, this is the data I'm collecting. As a part of your conversations, does this align with what you're hearing? The sales leader said, actually, yes. Then going to marketing, as I mentioned, and legal to see if we could build some collateral because we did not have a strong enough, very targeted asset that outlined the security and compliance concerns. It was sprinkled into some of the assets that we had, but we needed some dedicated assets. And then partnering with the other teams to make sure we can support the sales teams through the process. And the way I monitored whether or not the enablement initiative was successful was tracking those specific deals and seeing how they progressed. And it was 82% of those deals were able to move from the stage to the next stage within a 2 to 3 month period. And so that's an example of, as an enabler, identifying a need based on a problem that we were seeing. So the problem was these deals were stalling. We were going to miss for the quarter our number. How can we solve that? Getting that buy-in with the necessary teams, rolling out the initiative, and then hopefully your effort has a positive impact. And now I can go back to those sales leaders and all the stakeholders involved and say, here are the results, here are the metrics. What's that next potential problem that we can solve while continuing to reinforce what we already enabled on previously? So it's helping build trust. And now you're kind of building a cycle of work to build those relationships and that buy-in internally.
I really like that. And I think that's such a great example of what enablement is in terms of going out and identifying an issue and then bringing everyone together to solve it and in an effective way as well. Off the back of that, I'm wondering, like, do you, when you have a challenge like that, are you sort of following that same sort of blueprint for alignment every time, or is it flexible? Like, when you're thinking of, I got to get alignment going and I need to bring buy-in, like, what's your sort of first thought, your first steps? Is it sort of following that process every time, or is it a little bit more flexible? I guess in terms of I'm thinking from our listeners, if they're thinking of how they can do this, is there a sort of blueprint they can follow, or a couple of key steps that you make sure you hit every single time when it comes to gaining that sort of buy-in and alignment?
I think it's flexible. I think the one thing that you should always do as far as a blueprint is making sure all parties are bought in before starting your work, because again, that's going to save you as well as your team's time in the long run. That should not change. I think the order in which you get buy-in may change depending on the initiative. So for example, I may want to get buy-in from my own enablement team first before I even talk to any other stakeholders outside of my team to determine whether this also aligns with my enablement team's goals for the year. Because even if I identify a problem, if it doesn't align with our team's charter for that year, then it may be something we have to push off to next year. And so that's where you evaluate, is the effort going to drive that collective goal that's been already agreed upon? And so sometimes it's about socializing it with other enablers within your own team. Now, if you're a team of one, then it's normally whoever you're reporting into, socialize it with them. Get their thoughts on the initiative. Depending on what it is, I got really close with my operations teams at one of my companies, for example, and I knew they had a very strict roadmap that they always planned 3 to 6 months out. And some of the enablement initiatives I wanted to do were very dependent on tooling. I needed the tool to keep up with what I wanted to enable. And I wanted a dashboard built, or if they would allow me to build my own dashboard, it's that depending on your organization, but I needed to actually get their buy-in first, because I don't want to get everyone else within the organization excited about this initiative, and now it puts operations in the position where they're a blocker. So I think, again, understanding how your organization works and building trust and gaining that buy-in, sometimes, I would say a lot of the time, is about that relationship building. So if you know that operations is drowning in features and functionalities for your team, then maybe they should be the first group that you go to help you set realistic expectations with the other stakeholders on timing. Because if the operations roadmap, let's say to put a feature within your CRM, is 3 months out, then part of the conversation with the sales leaders is, I identified this problem. I want to start building this content now. I want to make sure we maybe train the managers first, make sure we enable them to successfully coach once we do fully launch this initiative, but wait until operations has a launch date for the features before enabling your team. That way, as a part of your enablement, you can also say, if you go to Salesforce, you'll see the fields are already there today, for example. So while I want to give a blueprint that this is how you should do it every time, it's not always the case. It's really, as an enabler, we should understand the business and the rhythm of the business enough to know which group to go to first.
That's really interesting, and I think actually you pointed out something so important in terms of for those who are lucky enough to have an enablement team and aren't on their own, to bounce the idea off them and socialize it like that, because sometimes you can't just run off and do something on your own. There might be, a second view, a second opinion can always sort of flag something that maybe you didn't notice. That's really important to flag as well. And in terms of sort of being in the workforce and understanding that flow of the business, like you mentioned, how satisfying is it when you're working in an environment where everyone's bought in, everyone's aligned with enablement, you've gotten to that stage of trust? How does that sort of improve the way you can do enablement when sort of you've gotten the trust and the buy-in, and you can sort of you feel like you can roll things out with confidence, and that everything's in a flow with itself.
I think you hit it directly. Having that buy-in up front and knowing you have the support helps you have more confidence also when you're delivering this enablement initiative, because you have leadership support to coach and educate after the training session or after the e-learning, whatever the modality is, which I think is important. Because by getting that buy-in, let's say from your CRO, that means he or she is committing to coach the managers and make sure the managers are also having those conversations. So that's why it's important to have that top-down buy-in. When you enable on something that is bought in, there is this sense of relief, because you know that we've already agreed on the plan. We've talked about timing. We've talked about modalities. We've talked about metrics that we're going to be tracking. So now it allows you to feel empowered to start executing and getting all the things that you need to get done in order to land this initiative. Once it's landed, a lot of times the enablement work is not over. And this is where you're having to follow up and make sure the managers are helping with that reinforcement and keeping that metric and whatever you're tracking top of mind. So hopefully you or your boss has a seat at the table where you can explain that initiative we rolled out X amount of weeks or months ago. This is how we're tracking. It's not tracking, let's say, where we want to. This is what I need from you. We've already aligned on this. And even better, if you have a supporting asset for your managers to help coach them, to guide the conversation, that's a bonus. But it keeps it top of mind so that you're a part of the conversation and it doesn't fall flat.
I love that. And I think that's such a great state to get into in terms of enablement in a time where not everyone has that buy-in. If you can get to it, that's like the incentive, is that it can be so great when you have an enablement team that everyone is bought into and everyone is aligned with. I'm keeping one eye at a time at the moment. I do want to ask, how are you feeling about presenting in San Francisco on this topic? It looks really exciting. It's going to be a great day. What are you sort of looking forward to about the event in San Francisco?
I'm very excited to go to the event. I'm fortunate enough, this is my third year attending, and the topics are constantly evolving every year. The trends within the industry are also evolving. So I'm very excited to hear other people's opinions and thoughts around where we are today compared to last year. I'm super excited to network and get the opportunity to see all the folks working at SEC. It's great. I get to interact with you all, but not in person very often. So I'm very excited to network with my peers and really learn and continue to evolve skills. So I'm super excited. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I will see you in San Francisco.
I love that. Look forward to seeing the talk as well. Thanks for tuning in to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast. Be sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice so you don't miss a thing. Hungry for more sales enablement content? Visit our website, salesenablementcollective.com, for articles, events, podcasts, and a quick and easy way to join our Slack community, home to thousands of your sales enablement peers.